Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's session on symbolic expression, we have with us Ms. Manisha, who is going to translate the lecture in sign language. The topic for discussion today is George Herbert Mead and his concept of self and identity. George Herbert Mead was a philosopher and a sociologist who gave us the understanding of the construction of self in the process of interaction. He has given us the understanding of society as being constructed through everyday experience. Mead's major work was Mind, Self and Society. This was a series of essays which was put together after his death and originally published in 1934, a work in which he emphasizes how the social world develops various mental states in the individual. So Mead was looking at the concept of self as an acting organism and not a passive receptacle, something that only receives and responds to stimuli. So this was how Durkheim and Parson perceived of individuals. So when he is trying to understand society, he is kind of considering mind, self and identity as a construct which is emerging in the process of social interaction. So none of them, neither mind nor self nor personality, is existing or priority to individual. It is the meaning that we attach to our everyday life that helps in the construction of self. Mead's theory of social self is based on the perspective that the self emerges from social interaction and not based on biological factors and inherited trait. Many a time we tend to understand a personality as something which is inherited from the parents or grandparents. What is ignored is that personality or an identity is not only a biological fact. It much depends on the interaction with peer groups, colleagues, friends and family. So this identity is not only a physiological or a biological concept but a social concept. Through his work, he establishes a relation between the self and identity. What is self? According to Mead, the self is an entity that individuals grow and develop to be socially productive citizen. So the self is actually an individual who has imbibed in him or her the values, the norms and code of conduct of the society. So it exists in humans and not in animal, because animals have not constructed something. It's not kind of able to evolve an entity, and the self is developed in the individual or human being through social activity and social relationship. The self cannot be cultivated without social interaction. It also doesn't exist in infant because babies don't participate in social activities and don't have social relationship. For him, self is the social product rising from the relation with other people. So it is something which is not static. It's not that you are born as an individual A and continue to remain so. As and how our interaction, our relationship with others in the society change, the self undergoes a change. And the self is not a biological entity, it is rather a reflexive self. Reflexive self is that individuals have the capacity to bend or flex back to itself in order to improve in order to construct a better self. So, reflexive self means that by means of reflexiveness, the turning back of the experience of the individual upon himself, that the whole social process is thus brought into experience of the individual involved in it. The reflexive sense, simply stated, is the capacity of human being to alter his interaction with someone. So, in case we go for a kind of a interview and we are rude or we are talking arrogantly, we can come back and kind of rethink. We go back to the situation and think that how can it be changed, and that is kind of interacting with others. Individuals like parents, teachers would kind of interact with the individual and give him or her the advice to be polite, to be following the certain cultured norms, and that will bring about a change in his result. It is by such means, that is reflecting on one's action, the individual takes the attitude of others towards himself, that the individual is able consciously to adjust himself to that process and to modify the resultant process in any given act in terms of his adjustment to it. So, the reflection self is a constant interaction with one's inner self, conscious mind, and also interaction with others. Along with the reflexive self, Mead is also talking about the importance of self, that is, how significant is the self. So, at the individual level, the self allows individual to be more efficient member of a society. So, the self is kind of evolving. It's not kind of something which will not alter. It has the possibility to undergo change, and the change is based on the opinion of others, and those opinion helps us to transform our behavior towards others. Because of the self, people are more likely to do what is expected of them in a given situation. So, the self is conscious. It has to kind of give the best, and therefore, in a given situation, the self follows the expected norms. The self allows for greater coordination in a society as a whole. Each person's unique set of selves makes him or her different from everyone else. So, no two individuals are same. And why? Because each individual, according to his or her understanding of social reality, will reflect on the action taken, and therefore each one of them will have a distinct self developed in the process of growing up. Now, how does the self develop, or how does it kind of evolve? Mead gives us three important ways in which the development of self can be understood. Number one is language, number two is play, and third is games. Now, language, as we know, is the medium of communication, medium by which gesture becomes significant gesture. We can attach meaning to a gesture because of language, and we communicate through symbols, gestures, words, and sounds. Language is able to convey our attitude, our opinion towards a subject or object to others. So, we are able to kind of establish an understanding of a phenomena through language. We will be able to express the meaning that we understand to the other person. So, emotions such as anger, happiness and confusion are conveyed through language. So, if you are angry, you will use abusive words. If you are kind of confused, you will be kind of using language which will not be clear in its meaning. The second component of self is play. Play implies that we are able to interact with other individual by taking on role. Role taking is very important. All the interaction, every actor has a role and there can be multiple roles which the individual have to play. In many a situation, we need to pretend, express our expectations of the other. Play is very important because it helps us to develop consciousness. During role play, a person is able to internalize the perspective of others and develop an understanding of how others feel about themselves and others in a variety of social situations. Now, role playing is very important also when we try to understand socialization. We've seen small children doing role playing. A small boy would put in the shoes of his father and try to become like a man going to the office. So, what is it? Identifying himself with the father who is the earning member and is kind of a dominant position in the family. So, the child learns the norms of patriarchy through role playing. The third component is game. It develops by allowing individual to understand and adhere to the rules of activity. So, every game has rules. Any kind of indoor or outdoor games has rules. So, even social reality interaction is like a game. We have to follow the rules of the activity, and by following these rules, we either become a kind of a individual who is disciplined, punctual, or we could become a deviant. So, the self is developing through games. Self is developed by understanding that there are rules in which one must be abide in order to win the game or be successful. So, if you are not abiding the rule of the game, you will be kind of declared as a deviant. You will be out of the game. So, for you to continue being a part of it, you have to follow rule and win the game. Similarly, in everyday interaction, we need to follow the rules and successfully complete the activity. Now, when he is talking about the development of self, he is kind of talking about 3 stages in which the self is developed. The first stage is imitation. Early childhood, all that a child does when he is not able to communicate, language is not developed, the child copies the banding it. A little boy might help his parents vacuum clean the floor by pushing a toy vacuum cleaner or even a stick around the room. Though nothing will happen, but the child is just aiming at being a mother or a teacher or a postman or a doctor. If we look around and we see the toys that we give to our children are all based on certain professions and certain kind of also gendered understanding of society. So, what are the children learning is trying to learn the art of teaching. So, they internalize the attitude of others who are significant to them. So, they can role play their father or the mother or the teacher. So, these are the significant others in their life. The third stage is game stage. So, in playing a game, the child comes to see himself from the perspective of other participants. So, when you have to play a game, one has to be aware of the other players. You have to be aware about the strength of your component, and you have to be very kind of alert to the movement that the opponent is making. In order to play a game, the child becomes aware of his relationship to other players. And in that kind of being aware, what is actually happening, we are also learning about others in our society and able to develop a collective viewpoint. This enables in the growth of social identity, which is at the level of individual as well as at the level of collectives, of the self, me and I. Mead made a significant contribution to the concept of differentiating the portion of the self that is developing through internalization of attitude and the other which is kind of prompt, it is automatic. So, we have the concept of me and I. Me is the part of the self that is an internalized attitude of the other. So, we are kind of trying to learn. It represents the conventional part of the self or the objective part. The I, on the other hand, is the acting part. It represents the self insofar as it is free, has initiative, novelty and unique. So, me is the objective part, I is the subjective part of the self. So, I is the immediate response of an individual. Somebody slaps you, you immediately slap at it without thinking of others. It is unpredictable, it is unplanned, it is the creative, innovative part of the self. People are not knowing in advance what the action would be, it's prompt. We are never totally aware of the I, and through it we surprise ourselves. Some of the time we kind of in a certain situation act out completely different, and then we are not even aware of the fact that such a quality exists in the individual. So, the I is actually unpredictable, it is one is unknown, unfamiliar, in the self is not familiar to it, and the I is known only once the act has been carried out. So, me is the planned one, it is the internalized part, whereas I is the part which is understood or realized once the act has been done. Mead was focusing on I. Why? Because he felt it is a source of novelty. What you have learned, what has been taught is not something important to learn. How people react, how people respond to a stimuli is something which a sociologist would be interested in. Mead believed that it is in the I that most important values are located. The I constitutes something we all seek, the realization of the self. It is the I that permits us to develop a definite personality. Every personality is a mix of I and me. So, the self develops out of the fusion of me and I, and it is kind of nothing that in many personality the I dominates, in other the me dominates. And famous personality which Mead is saying, it is the I which is larger proportion than the other people. If we look into the comparison between me and I, we see The me is the self created through socialization. We are learning the internalizing the values through interaction. I is the response of individual to the attitude of community. It is spontaneous, unpredictable and creative. Me is kind of always trying to predict. You can know how you're going to behave. In advance you know your action, and most of the term it is conformity conforms with the self. The self is aware of the action of the me. I acts in extreme situation of outrage, of excitement, of emotion. The disciplining part, the me will continuously discipline the I, and the I is subjective, imaginative and created. So, two parts of the self are in constant interaction, and it is through the interaction between the me and the I that the self develops. Now, when we look into Mead's concept, we have talked about self, we need to understand society. And society is the interaction of the self and mind which regulates the behavior. So, society implies regulation of behaviors, habits and common responses, and these responses are learned through socialization. Socialization was very important process for Mead because it is helping us to learn how to conform to the social norm, and socialization through play, game helps in the development of an identity. Socialization is happening throughout our life, more when we are children, and earlier in a later age as adult also we are socializing ourselves to the larger whole. So, socialization is tied up with social change. Mead gives us certain stages of socialization which we have already talked about in the development of self. The imitation stage, which is between 0 to 3 years, the play stage from 3 to 5 years, and the game stage from 5 to 9 years. So, if we look into this chart, stage is 1 is preparatory, where imitation is taking place. It happens in infancy and toddler. Second stage is play, preschool children, role taking, role of specific others. Third is game, which is taking place in school going children. Generalized other, because we start creating role models. We start identifying others as a role and we want to become like them. So, this is play, games, the interaction between me and I that helps us to understand the development of self and identity. The important references for understanding Mead's theory are: number 1, Shelley, Dewitt and Orenstein's sociological theory, classical statements. Number 2, Bloomer, Society as Symbolic Interactionism in Contemporary Sociological Theory. And third is Mead's own work, which was published after his death, Mind, Self and Society from the Standpoint of Social Behavior, published by University of Chicago Press. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.